want to introduce the Assistant Coordinator for WX4 NHC, WD4R, Julio Ripoll.
Thank you, Rob. I'll try to make it fast. I only have 80 slides, so bear with me. Anyway, we appreciate you being here. This is our agenda, but it was modified just a little bit for the morning. The afternoon remains the same. Here we go. So, a few years ago, you remember this, there was very little activity in the Atlantic. Don't we wish that it was still the same? But now it feels more like this. I mean, the last couple of years has been just incredible. And this is actually not just a funny picture, it's a real picture. It's the actual hurricane tracks from 1842 to 2015. And in the crosshairs, you can barely see it, is Florida. So even though you may have the latest weather technology, and you protect your vehicle as best you can, and you buy all the food that you need, especially the Spam, which is really good, when they issue an evacuation, follow the exact procedures from your local authority. In Florida, this is the one we follow. And here in New Orleans, of course, you got to grab your beignets. Anyway, so 2017, I'm going to recap just a couple hurricanes from 2017, 2018. And 2017, one of the ones that personally involved our area where I live was Hurricane Irma. And it was very scary because at one time it had reached almost Category 5 strength. And all the forecasts were coming basically right at us. It went over the Virgin Islands and just north of Puerto Rico and was tracking right at us with a very symmetrical shape, very symmetrical eye. And, you know, when it passed by us, it went just south of us. But as you know, the northeast quadrant is really the strongest winds that you have. So at that time, and I work at the University of Miami School of Medicine. I'm one of the architects for the medical campus. And they had asked me to bring in ham radio there. They knew what we had done during their the volunteer service we did through the Haiti earthquake and what we do for the National Hurricane Center. So I was sitting in the command center at Bascom Palmer Eye Institute. That's a 6-story building, is very well fortified, all concrete. They had an anemometer up on top there, and that anemometer, believe it or not, read a wind gust of 133 miles per hour. And these are all the heads, the CEO and the dean of Bascom Palmer and UM Medicine there. And one of the things is the human aspect of it. They had opened up that building as a shelter for all the employees, all the staff, and there were over 300 people sheltered in that building. And even though we were sheltered in there for 4 days as Hurricane Irma came about, this is the chairman of the Bascom Palmer Eye Institute. He took the time to, and I don't know where he got them, hundreds of cupcakes, and all the children that had a birthday during Hurricane Irma got a birthday party at the Eye Institute there. But at 5 in the morning, we had people sheltered on almost every floor, sleeping on the floor. They brought their own sleeping bags and everything. One of the windows, the sealant around the window had come completely off. We had wind gusts over 100 miles per hour. And I just want you to hear what we heard there. It made us evacuate the whole 5th floor. If it works. So just imagine waking up at 5 in the morning to this deafening sound coming because of the wind coming through probably a 1-inch space around that large window pane. That's something you shouldn't do. see if the window's gonna hold. But the windows held. We have shutters on all of the windows there, but it's just that when we went and looked, that sealant around the window came off, and it funneled. You know, you have a huge building, 6 stories tall, and that facade facing the wind, and it finds the weakest point to come in. And when it did, the frame on that window just rattled like crazy. Well, a few days later, I come home, and this was my backyard. And if you see, let's see, right up here is a satellite dish. Well, I don't own a satellite dish. So I have no idea where it came from, but it ended up embedded in my roof. We lost about half the roof on this side of the house. Just peeled away, and some of the plywood caved in. And it only took about, 4 months to get a new roof. And that's one of our trees, went down, uplifted the fence back there. But we didn't have it as bad as Hurricane Maria. Major hurricane that damaged not just the Virgin Islands, which Fred had mentioned, all the things that he went through, but it also devastated Puerto Rico. And a lot of the Puerto Ricans there were just not prepared. The infrastructure was weak to begin with. But just imagine going through that and waking up, and then your streets are impassable. They look like this. And it's going to take, going through Hurricane Andrew in 1992, it took Miami, and especially south of Miami, Homestead, years to be able to recover. And not to a normal life, but in a different life. Landmarks were gone. Things that you were used to doing are no longer valid, and you have to relearn everything. So Hurricane Maria is going to affect Puerto Rico for many years in the future, but hopefully they'll improve their infrastructure. But as soon as
communication is key right now in Puerto Rico, but without power down there, it has not been easy.
However, there is just one mode of communication that has withstood the strong winds and the flooding, and that's the ham radio. And the dependable medium is headquartered right here in Connecticut. Newsday's photojournalist Kim Melick shows us how operators are helping save the island.
Monitoring for any message traffic from the Hurricane Maria affected areas. If you have traffic for the net or need assistance, please call in now.
Last Friday, I received a phone call from Red Cross. They were looking at potentially establishing up to 500 Red Cross shelters across the island. So they came to us to see if we could assist with the communications and gather up some volunteers to deploy with their teams and their shelter teams.
This is Kilo Golf 5, Bravo India Mike.
12 hours after we put out the call for volunteers in Puerto Rico, we had 350 volunteers.
Please keep this frequency clear so we can monitor for any traffic out of the Hurricane Maria affected area.
So by Monday afternoon, we had 50 volunteers identified, over to Red Cross, vetted and processed, and now they just arrived there this morning in San Juan. So this is one of the basic HF, or kind of a long-range communications kit. The kit is built around an HF transceiver, an HF radio, which makes long-distance communications possible. And there's all the cabling and connectors that make this happen for power. There's antennas in the kit, VHF radios for local communications, a small toolkit so they can do repairs in the field, and of course all the necessary manuals to figure out how this stuff works in a pinch.
Team emergency radio net Saturn calling any station in the affected area of Hurricane Maria.
Some of them are military, some of them are first responders, but every one of them says, I don't care about the personal sacrifice that I have to make. There's a greater good to do here.
Well, we appreciate everything the ARRL did for us, especially during the Haitian earthquake. And my first phone call after I got the call to set up stations in Port-au-Prince, I called the ARRL, and they came through and sent us a complete go kit, just like that one with HF and VHF capabilities that we set up down in Port-au-Prince. Then we did an identical station at the University of Miami, so that if anything goes wrong, and it did, of course, in Port-au-Prince, we can imitate everything here, get it fixed, and give them instructions on which diode to cut or replace and things like that. So they did an incredible job. You'll see our first Go kit we built at the Hurricane Center in a minute. And I want to recognize Fred Kleber and Oscar KP4RF from Puerto Rico, who did such an incredible job, not just during the hurricane, but in the aftermath, and received the ARRL's International Humanitarian Award. So thank you for everything you did. You deserve it. So then going forward to 2018, we had two major hurricanes, Florence and Michael, and I'm just going to concentrate a little bit on Michael because Bob from the Canadian Hurricane Center described that in detail pretty good. And just imagine the force of this eye coming on shore near Panama City and Mexico Beach. It just completely wiped that area out. And I mean, there's a few buildings standing, but where you don't see buildings, there were buildings there before. And some of them collapsed completely, some of them partially, depending on their construction. In the new building codes, many would have survived with lesser damage than that. And, I can just see how people would feel when you lose everything and you have no other place to go. So Hurricane Michael was just upgraded a few weeks ago to a Category 5, and they say, well, why wasn't a Category 5 before? Well, a lot of the anemometers blew off, before it reached Cat 5 wind strength. So they had no proof that it went that far up. So they depend a lot on the surface reports that you and I can send into the Hurricane Center, and then also damage assessment. The meteorologists go to the scene, look at the damages, do calculations, structural calculations on things that blew away, bent, or broke, and what the forces that it would take to make that happen. So it is only the second time since 1992 that a hurricane has been elevated to a Cat 5. Hurricane Andrew was one. The same thing. When we lived through Andrew, we knew it was a major, major hurricane. But the anemometers blew away before they can prove it. They came back, and especially Turkey Point Nuclear Plant, their anemometer had a gust of 222 miles per hour. Okay, that's a hurricane, not a tornado, but it was a tornado the size of a hurricane. So real briefly, our history and what we do. And way in the beginning, we were located inside a high-rise building. Whoever thought that was a good idea for Hurricane Center, I don't know. But we were on the 6th floor, and you can tell because it was the only floor that had hurricane shutters. Well, during Andrew, a lot of windows blew out above us. So ceilings came down, water came in, generators on the roof fell 12 stories down to the parking garage. So our first station, we actually set up on one of the hurricane forecaster's desk. And this was me and Neil Frank. This is when I had a black mustache and hair. And we had the old Yaesu FTO 101, which had the 4 sweep tubes that we kind of warm up for 10 minutes so it wouldn't drift. And of course, the 10-pound VHF handheld and a bottle of aspirin. We didn't have Tylenol back then. So someone had the idea that we may have to relocate during a hurricane, and we built a Go kit. And the only problem was it weighed about 300 pounds. So we never took it anywhere, but it had a nice aluminum box. So after Andrew, the government very wisely thought that the Hurricane Center should be in a hurricane-proof building. So in 1995, they built the building that we're in now, and it is Cat 5 hurricane-proof. The walls are 10-inch thick, poured-in-place steel-reinforced walls. And the 2 bathrooms are tornado-proof, EF5, which have 20-inch thick concrete walls and roof all the way around. So if there's a tornado coming, everyone runs to the bathroom. And here we go. We ran over 2,000 feet of coax. We have, right now, we have 7 antennas on the roof that are totally dedicated to amateur radio. And we have redundant backups. So basically, for every mode we're on, we have 2 antennas, a prime and a backup. And then in the access flooring, by the way, most of the Hurricane Center is built with a concrete floor slab, and then there's about a 1.5 foot space, like computer flooring, above there. When you take those tiles off, there are miles and miles of cables down there. And when we moved in, it happened to be one of the busiest hurricane seasons on record. So we were working the radios and running cables all at the same time. If you're ever in Miami or interested in seeing the Hurricane Center, you have to schedule ahead of time. You can't just walk in, but they do have public tours. And you find out when they are, and you can go and get a tour of the Hurricane Center. This is our radio system here, and we do have, starting from the left, it's only a 600 watt amplifier, but that's basically all we really need. Then we have some new equipment we got a couple years ago, a Yaesu FT1200. And so the whole thing runs around 500 to 600 watts. And then we have, above that, we have then another HF radio, another Yaesu, that does the HF APRS and weather APRS, and that beacons every 15 minutes. And you can send us your weather reports from your weather station that way. And then, of course, to the right, you'll see 2 computers. And one of them, we run some local programs, including the wind APRS, and also we look at the Mesonet, where if you're not an amateur radio operator, but you have an amateur weather station, you can beacon to the NOAA Mesonet site, and it will come up on our computer. And that's interesting sometimes because we can get reports in between the ham radio reports, and then that fills in all the gaps there. And then, of course, one of the computers is dedicated to Echolink, and that's what Rob is going to describe in more detail. And basically that conference, we call it a conference room on Echolink, links up not only Echolink, but IRLP, DMR, and some of the other digital modes. And believe it or not, many times when HF propagation goes out, which is lately often because we don't have very good propagation, Echolink fills in the gap, and they just go everywhere, including social media. And like we said, we don't care how the reports get to us, if it's via HF, VHF, digital modes. In fact, sometimes we get reports that are faxed, and those are legitimate reports, and we put them down. And then on one computer, we have an active chat room between us and the Hurricane WatchNet, so that if we have to do any intercoordination with their net controls, we don't have to do it over the air and occupy airtime, and we can do it directly over a chat room. And that's been very instrumental, especially when we don't know if they can hear us or not, then we can go on that mode there. This is just a group shot of our ham radio operators. Most of them showed up one day at one time because we had some free food. And we took advantage to take a picture out in front of the center there. And we're always looking for good local operators. We need people and operators that have at least a general class license and have good people skills, because we're dealing with, professional meteorologists and everything. So we have to be able to communicate with them well. And then we also deal with some of the local emergency management agencies there too. So when we're on the air, sometimes we have one operator, depending on the hurricane and how much activity, 2 operators, sometimes up to 4 operators at one time, operating all the different modes. We can't operate every existing mode. I know that we've tried, or we wanted to do D-Star, and we just don't have enough antennas, positions, and operators. So the D-Star people were fantastic, because they are organized severe weather net. They gather their D-Star reports and they send us to us in the same form we use through DRATs. And that's been working wonderfully. So now we're getting all of these different nets coming in and sending us reports. So now it's been 39 years, and we're on our 10th Hurricane Center director, and I can't be any happier that it's Ken Graham. Not just because he's a ham. I mean, his personality and his people skills are just fantastic, and he understands our role within the Hurricane Center very well. And you just met Ken, and I was going to make this a surprise, but he spoiled it because he told you that he is actually a ham, and he's hands-on, and he even brought his Yaesu radio that he had during Katrina and had us program all the way at Miami frequencies, and he keeps it on his desk. So real quickly, the purpose and goals of WX4NHC is to collect weather data, which is called surface reports or eyewitness reports from the areas in real time, and the hurricane forecasters use that. Provide emergency backup communications. We've done that several times when we get hit directly by a hurricane. And it's not just to other weather stations, but also local emergency management agencies and the mayor's office, things like that. Provide advisories over ham radio when the sources are not available. Many times we do that, especially through the Hurricane WatchNet. They will read the advisories. And I heard back from a Mexican ham in the Yucatan one time. And he said during, I think it was Hurricane Michelle that was going through the Yucatan area that he was in. And he said the only reports they had for their entire village came through ham radio. And he would relay those reports to a tiny AM broadcast station. And that's how all the citizens with a little AM radio knew what was going on and what was approaching. And of course, to enhance and promote the accuracy and availability of weather data surface report. We encourage you not just to give us your eyewitness reports, which are vital, but also if you can get a weather station, it'd be nice too to know what your peak winds are, the direction of the wind as well. And our ultimate goal is to help save lives. And I think everybody here is here for that reason. They feel they can help do that. So how ham radio operators can help during hurricane season? Well, here's a flow chart, and there are many, many different ways you can help. Participate in that, whether you're in an affected area or not. You can be a relay station. You can hear things that, depending on your location, someone else cannot hear. And then, of course, you can bring in reports through the Hurricane WatchNet, the Echolink net, and many other different ways. And then we communicate those reports back to other agencies, including FEMA and the Red Cross. And you'll see this is also on our website, different frequencies that you can contact us on. The Hurricane WatchNet has been on the air since 1965, and Bobby Graves will give you all the details of that. And this is this is our main HF frequency on 14,325 megahertz. And we do most of our communications to the affected area that way. And another mode, the digital mode, which we primarily use Echolink, but you can use other digital modes to connect to Echolink. Rob Macedo will explain how that works and all the benefits we've had. I mean, one particular story that I remember was 2004, Hurricane Ivan was going over the island of Grenada, and we had no HF communications with Grenada. Propagation was out, and the only person left in the university, I think it was Georgetown in Grenada, was on 40 meters communicating someone in St. Lucia. And that ham in St. Lucia then had Echolink. So he'd take the reports for 40 meters, and then he would relay them over Echolink back to us. So here again, it doesn't have to be solely HF, RF, and digital separate. Sometimes they help each other. And we're thrilled that Rob was awarded this prestigious award by the Blue Hill Observatory for all his outstanding service up in New England, during hurricanes and during all sorts of severe weather, and his incredible crew of spotters that he's got on the ground there. One other method that we gather information is we had made up this group called the Citizens Weather Observer Program, the CWLP, where we encourage people that may not be ham radio operators to you download this free software, put your weather station on the internet so that you can beacon your weather, because otherwise you have a weather station, it's doing great, you read it, and where does that data go? It goes nowhere. But with this, it comes back to NOAA, and it comes back to the Hurricane Center. And the surface reports, you can send them in online as well. On our website, you can fill out a form. It prints right at our desk, and we take it to the forecasters. And you can add it at the bottom of your commentary as well. And in your handouts, you saw the written form, and sometimes we're old-fashioned, and we get stuff over HF that we have to write down by hand. But it's a good checklist, because that way you can go back down and you go, wait a minute, you gave us the wind speed, but what about the wind direction? Or what about the barometric pressure? And this was the DRATS form that was put together by John Davis, WB, for QDX, where they had that severe weather net, and they would send us these reports as well. So now we're getting multiple sources of reports, many different ways, and they come together. And it becomes a lot of data. During Hurricane Maria, I think we had several hundred reports coming in, a huge stack. And when we take them over there to the Hurricane Center main area, where you see on TV with there are all these different clipboards for all the different types of reports. And ham radio, very clearly labeled, has their clipboard there. And many times when we come in and put our report on the clipboard, they immediately turn around and says, what is it? Is it 100-mile-per-hour wind? I want to see it, So can ham radio make a difference? Are we dinosaurs now? Service over 100 years old and all that? Well, I told this reporter, next time you're in Bermuda during a hurricane like Fabian, go outside with your satellite phone and call me. Okay. He got the message. So how does ham radio help? Well, 1980, we had Hurricane Allen, and we essentially became the sole source of information for the people in St. Lucia. Devastating hurricane, a lot of injured people. They did a Mayday call on the Hurricane WatchNet, and we were there, and all of a sudden we get a call from the British hospital ship HMS Glasgow that was nearby, and they said, we can render aid. We have helicopters. We had a whole bunch of hospital beds. We have doctors on board, but we need permission to land because you're no longer a British territory. 10 minutes later, that ham had the Prime Minister of St. Lucia on ham radio giving them permission to land. So you see, ham radio does all these different things. It's not just weather, but it connects all the different people that have to be connected to get help to those people there. And then that same hurricane, 2 weeks later, hits Texas there, and we lost all the communications with the NWS Brownsville, but they had a ham there with a wire antenna and a car battery, and during landfall, he was talking back to Dr. Neil Frank on there. That was all in one hurricane. So then, here you go. Then we go fast forward 12 years, same thing, Hurricane Andrew, knocked out everything. We had almost no street lights, all cell towers were down, nothing was up. And we lost 300,000 homes that year. And after we made many calls over ham radio, over 200 hams volunteered, not just locally, from around the country came down to help communicate for weeks at a time when there was basically no other way to communicate, including with the military and the Navy when they sent down some of their hospital ships with helicopters. They had hams at the command post and on helicopters talking to each other because the military could not talk to the fire rescue down on the ground. So ham radio became that missing link there to put it all together. So here we go with Hurricane George, 1998. It had exited. The importance of one report is the emphasis of this. And it was just got off of Haiti. It was at night. The eye was not that visible. And the hurricane forecaster, Lixian Avila, came in the ham radio room, our radio room that we share with 6 other people that put everything you see on the internet is in our room. And he came in there and he says, I need you to get a ham in Cuba on the most eastern point right now. And I'm like, this is not a telephone. I can't just call somebody. He says, well, tell them, get on I was like, but they're on their Cuban civil defense frequency. He says, it's an emergency. I'm a federal officer. I'm telling you. I got on there, and lo and behold, there was this ham in a little city called Punto Este, which is the eastern point of Cuba. And he got on there, and he was screaming into his mic. He says, I'm standing on my chair because the water is filling up my house. And Lixian says, give me the wind direction. The wind direction. The last three words from that ham were del sur, they're from the south. Lixian ran out of there. He said, that's all I need. I didn't know what happened, but they didn't have the correct tracking forecast yet because they had missed a bunch of different reports of where the eye was located, and they had no way to fly aircraft over Cuban territory. I went home, 11 o'clock news, I see Max Mayfield on there reading one of our reports. And he says, according to this report from where it came, from Punta Este, we have adjusted our track northerly. That one report made a difference that changed that track for that hurricane. Another importance of one report. This is Hurricane Michelle in 2001. We were getting live reports from the Isle of Youth in Cuba, where they had extensive flooding. This young man worked for the Cuban Army. He was a radar operator. He's giving us coordinates. I was like, are you going to go to jail or something? He was so enthusiastic. I said, just keep sending them, you know. And by the way, after Hurricane Michelle, he wrote a book. And he emailed us. He says, can I use a picture of Max Mayfield in my book? So I asked Max, and Max says, yeah, why not? So he actually wrote a book, and he became famous down there for that reporting he did during there. But that helped with the forecasting, but even more so, when Hurricane Michelle was on its way out of Cuba, going up to the Bahamas, the bottom south portion of the eye started opening, which indicated weakening, and the Met Office in Nassau said, we're going to drop the hurricane warnings until we got reports from this sailboat, which was anchored in Highborn Key there, right in the middle of the path of Hurricane Michelle. And he kept sending reports of 100 to 110 miles per hour. But the satellite picture showed an open eye. Later, Max explained to me that even though physically the eye looked different, the mass of the wind keeps rotating there until it receives friction like land. So Max got on the phone, issued an emergency report, called the Met Office in Nassau, and said, keep your hurricane warnings up. One ham radio report made a difference, possibly saved lives. And we made it to their official forecast many times, and I'll read you this real quickly. It says, amateur radio ham operators throughout the Caribbean region and those working as part of the Hurricane Center's WX4NHC and the Hurricane WatchNet team were indispensable in providing critical reports as Ivan moved through the Windward Islands and across the Caribbean Sea. So everything you do is noticed. And I'll go real quickly. Of course, this is Katrina in 2005, and it killed 1,833 people and caused $108 billion in damages, something that is almost unheard of now. And the main cause of flooding, like Ken Graham said, was water, not necessarily the wind, the water, the flooding. And Katrina, the same thing happened. We lost all comms with the NWS stations, like Lake Charles and Slidell, but except for Slidell. Slidell had a ham radio operator on there, and he stayed with us for 6 hours. All the people from the NWS office next door to us, because remember, in our building we have the Hurricane WatchNet, NWS, and then we have TAFB, which is the marine weather. They all came into the radio room to listen to the live reports as Katrina was making landfall there, and took those reports down. And you can see that I was kind of nervous. My handwriting was pretty bad, but this was live as it was happening. So why do we volunteer? Well, we volunteer our hours, our time, our skills, to help people. And that's why you guys are here today, because you want to help. You know what you can do, and you just have to be in the right place at the right time. And then you can help people. And you may not even know who you're helping and if they were okay or not. But I'll tell you a little story. We were active during or right after the earthquake in Haiti, and we had deployed 5 teams of 2 ham operators weekly down to Port-au-Prince to help communicate with the field hospital set up by the University of Miami to the hospital here so the doctors can communicate and help each other. They had sent 144 doctors and staff down there. 40 satellite phones, never got a dial tone. They sent 2 portable VSAT stations there. One never worked, the other one was intermittent. But then when we sent the ham radios down there, we became the 911 center for Haiti. Incredible. Everything went through there, including military traffic. We even helped coordinate helicopter traffic and pickups and the whole works. But this one ham, this one ham is ex-military, and he touched me when he sent me this picture. And here's the story. He says, one evening near midnight, a bunch of trauma nurses stopped me at the communications shack and asked me if I want to go to a child's birthday party. The lady who is in the pink blouse asked me if I could do something for her little girl. She's 3 years old. And so they went to one of the supply shacks that they had there and found some clean donated toys. And they took it to the little girl. And she was so happy, even though she had lost her leg. And he says, I must fess up, when I got back to my tent, I cried like a baby. So this is why we're here. This is why we love to help. Thank you very much.